3.1 Theme 3 Arts and Media. Lesson 3.1 Vocabulary for Listening, the Mass Media. Exercise B2 Listen and check. Nowadays, there are many information organizations. For example, we have television, radio, newspapers, and of course the Internet. They all provide news and information to the general public. The word for all these organizations is media. It is an unusual word because it is a plural. The singular word is medium. This word has different meanings in everyday English, but here it means a way of communicating. For example, we can say, the Internet is the most important medium today. We often talk about the mass media. The word mass means a large amount, so we use the phrase for media that reaches a large number of people. The mass media have a lot of influence on the general public. This is because modern technology can give the news very fast to millions of people. So the media have a very big influence. In television and radio, we say information is broadcast to viewers and listeners. This means it is transmitted over a very wide area, perhaps over the whole world at the same time. People in many different countries often watch the same breaking news events live on television, for example. (3.2) Exercise C1. Listen. Make notes about each event.
In 1815, there was an important battle between the British and French armies at a place in Belgium called Waterloo. As a matter of fact, the small town is only about 400 kilometres from London. The battle took place on the 18th of June. However, the general public in London did not know the result of the battle for 4 days. Why did it take so long for the news to reach London? Firstly, because there were no reporters at the scene. Secondly, because all messages had to go slowly over land. There was no method to broadcast the news from Belgium to London. 200 years later, on the 11th of September 2001, there was a major news event in New York City. The World Trade Center was attacked by terrorists. Reporters were at the scene in a few minutes. The news of the event was broadcast around the world, so hundreds of millions of people watched the breaking news live on television.
(3.3) Lesson 3.2 Real-time listening. The early history of mass media news. Exercise A2. Listen and check your ideas.
Picture A. A Roman man is making an official announcement to the crowd. Picture B. This is a very early newspaper. Picture C. This is an example of early printing from China. Picture D. This is an early machine for printing. Picture E. This is one of the first newspapers in the world. Picture F. This is one of the very first newspaper advertisements. Picture G. The people are listening to a story from a newspaper because some of them cannot read. Picture H. This is a range of print media from the present day.
(3.4)
Today, I'm going to talk about the early history of the mass media for news. I'm not going to talk about the complete history today, just the early history. And I'm not going to talk about the mass media for entertainment, just the mass media for news. We'll talk about the mass media for entertainment another day. First, I'll talk about spoken news, then I'll tell you about written news in ancient Rome and ancient China. Next, I'll describe the start of printing and the development of daily newspapers. Finally, I'll set you an assignment.
(3.5)
For many thousands of years in human history, there was no mass media for news because ancient people didn't have written language. Gradually, ancient people developed written language, but most people were not literate. They could not read or write their own language. People communicated news in speech. For example, in England, there were town criers. These people shouted the news in the streets. But news was not communicated to all the people in a particular area at the same time. For example, everybody in one town or city, because all communication was in speech. There was no method of transmitting speech to a large number of people. Transmission of speech to a mass audience started with the invention of the radio in the late 19th century. So, there was no written news for thousands of years. Then, around 60 BCE, the first written news appeared. It was called acta diurna, which means daily acts or events. It was not printed, it was handwritten. It appeared each day on message boards in the squares of ancient Rome. However, as I said, most people could not read. Therefore, this was not really mass media. Someone had to read the news to individuals or groups of people. At around the same time, there were daily reports in ancient China called Pao. But these reports were for government officials. They were not for the general public. So, how did the mass media for news really start? In around 900 CE, the first real printing appeared. It was invented in China. There was one wooden block for each character. The printer could move these around to make text. However, the process was very slow, so printing was very expensive. Then, in 1446, a German, Gutenberg, invented the first printing press. This was really the start of the mass media for news. The printing machine produced text quickly and cheaply, so the printer could make hundreds or even thousands of copies and distribute them all over the town, the area, or even the country. In 1450, book distribution was very small. There were only a few thousand books in Europe. All of them were produced by hand. By 1500, there were more than 9 million books. The general public wanted to read the books, so they started to learn to read. Printing led to literacy in the general public, and literacy led to the first daily newspapers at the start of the 17th century. In 1477, a tiny event occurred. However, it is very important in the history of the mass media. An Englishman, William Caxton, produced the first book with advertisements. Why is this so important? Because the mass media and advertising are very closely linked. Okay. We have heard that the mass media really began in the 15th century and newspapers in the 17th century. We have also seen that literacy for the general public also started around then. But we have also noted that almost from the first, there was a link between the mass media for news and advertising. What are the links today? That is your assignment. Think about the different kinds of mass media for news today. Just news for the moment. What is the link with advertising? Oh, by the way, I'm not just thinking about advertising products and services. I'm thinking about advertising ideas and opinions as well.
3.6. Exercise D1. Listen to some sentences. Number the words below in order.
1. When did the mass media for news begin? 2. I'm going to talk about the early history of the subject. 3. At first, people could only communicate in speech. 4. So communication of the news was still through speech. 5. There was no method of transmitting speech over large distances. 6. The first newspaper appeared in ancient Rome. 7. But most of the general public couldn't read. 8. The Gutenberg printing machine made the process much faster. 9. Newspapers were very widely distributed. 10. The ability to read is called literacy.
Lesson 3.3. Learning new listening skills. Predicting content from linking words. Exercise A. Listen to some sentences. Tick the word you hear.
1. I will define the word media. 2. I am going to talk about the news media. 3. Medium has two main meanings. 4. A medium is a way of communicating too. 5. The mass media gets to or reaches a large number of people. 6. People communicated in pairs or small groups, or even in large crowds. 7. In around 900 CE, the first printing appeared. 8. The actor Diana appeared on message boards. 9. However, most people could not read. 10. Therefore, this was not really mass media.
(3.8) Exercise C. Listen to some extracts from a lecture. Predict the next part from the linking word.
1. There are advertisements during most mass media news programs because the mass media companies do not make money from the news itself. 2. In fact, 1 minute of TV news could cost the company $20,000. 3. Most mass media news companies buy the pictures from other companies, but they add the sound. 4. They pay a person to talk over the pictures. In addition, they employ people to link the news items. 5. It is very expensive to produce news programs, so mass media news companies are very big.
(3.9) Lesson 3.4. Grammar for listening. Word building. Verbs into nouns. Exercise A. Listen to some sentences. Each sentence contains one of each pair of words on the right. Do you hear the noun or the verb in each case?
1. The festival is celebrated in August. 2. When you combine all the colours of the rainbow, white light appears. 3. The competition is won by the strongest man. 4. Man has always wanted to explore space. 5. It is very important to motivate people to do a good job. 6. At first, the Wright brothers made bicycles, but later they changed to the production of planes. 7. You must get a person who is qualified for a job. 8. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about the natural features of the country. After this description, I will tell you a little about the history. 9. Everyone in the town participates in the festival. 10. The careful preparations of the Wright brothers helped them to succeed.
3.10. Exercise B. Listen to a sentence. Try to hear the important verb. Which noun do you expect the speaker to use later in the text? Say the noun. 1. In this talk, I'm going to tell you how to apply to university. 2. It is very important to organize your files logically. 3. You must attend every lecture. 4. During the experiment, we measured the distance for each container. 5. Marconi found a way to transmit speech over long distances. 6. First, I'm going to explain the rules. 7. You must choose the best place to advertise. 8. The country is situated in Northern Europe. 9. The selection panel decides the best candidate. 10. Extroverts sometimes behave in a rude way. (3.11) Lesson 3.5. Applying new listening skills. Advantages and disadvantages of mass media news. Exercise A. Listen to each sound. It is the stressed syllable of a word connected with the mass media. Can you identify the word?
A. Me. B. Tell. C. Chan. D. Meh. E. Mish. F. Mune. G. Vert. H. Port. I. Then. J. News.
(3.12) Exercise A2. Listen and check your ideas.
A. Media. B. Television. C. Channel. D. Message. E. Transmission. F. Communicate. G. Advertisement. H. Report. I. Event. J. Newspaper.
(3.13) Lesson 3.6. Vocabulary for speaking. Stereotypes.
In the last lecture, we looked at the origins of mass media news. As I said, at one time there was no mass media news because people couldn't read and because there was no transmission of speech. Nowadays, news is all around us all of the time. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? What are the advantages and disadvantages of mass media news? Well, let's look first at some advantages. There are many advantages, but I'm only going to talk about 3. Firstly, mass media news reaches people very quickly because there are reporters in every country. In addition, we have very fast communications nowadays. People often watch a news event as it happens. There is even a special phrase for this. It is called breaking news. So, that is one advantage: speed. Secondly, it is very cheap to receive television and radio programs nowadays. So, mass media news is very cheap. In fact, the consumer, the television viewer, does not pay for news directly at all. Advertising pays for the news. So, we have speed and cost. Finally, it is very difficult now for governments or people to hide anything. At one time, governments or people in public life could keep secrets. But nowadays, mass media reporters find out secrets and broadcast them to the world. The general public needs to know about these secrets in many cases. What about the disadvantages? Well, once again, there are many disadvantages, but I'm only going to mention 3. Firstly, mass media news needs stories all the time. Some TV news channels are on 24 hours a day, so they need news stories all the time. Perhaps some of these stories are not really news. Perhaps the general public don't need to know some of the stories. So, that is one disadvantage: quantity. Perhaps there is too much news nowadays. Secondly, mass media news is cheap for the consumer, but it is expensive for the mass media company. As I mentioned in the last lecture, 1 minute of news can cost $20,000. So the news company has to sell advertising during the news broadcasts. Perhaps the advertisers influence the news companies in their choice of story. Okay, that's quantity and bias. Are some news companies biased because they take money from particular advertisers? Finally, nobody can keep a secret anymore because there are reporters everywhere. But some secrets are good, aren't they? People need privacy sometimes, don't they? People need to be private at home with their children. Perhaps the mass media news programs tell us things which we don't need to know about celebrities and even about ordinary people.